From the title of this video alone, you may have assumed that a certain figurehead in the world of football will feature at some point during the course of it, and it is someone, a giant of the game, who recently passed away. Indeed, it is 2 days ago as of the time of this recording, and I think it's important that I acknowledge his genius and his career in a brief segment at the start of this video. Diego Armando Maradona was one of the greatest players to ever play the game. Regardless of what you think of his antics, his cheating, his drug scandals, or anything like that, you cannot deny that he put all of his talent to extremely good use whenever he stepped foot on a football pitch. Perhaps the most prevalent example of a flawed genius in the history of the sport, Maradona was undoubtedly a maverick, but whenever he stepped foot on that football pitch, there was a spark that burned inside of him, and it helped him achieve World Cup glory with Argentina in 1986, as well as win Napoli their only 2 Serie A titles in their history. And he had amazing close control, incredible finishing, and an amazing attitude and love of the game. Of course, his career was littered with controversial events, and 2 of them will feature during the course of this video, but that doesn't take away from the immense talent that he had on a football pitch. Rest in peace, Diego Armando Maradona. Hello and welcome back to the Hazzabhajan YouTube channel. It is Harry here, and if you realise that obviously things do seem a little bit different, it's because I'm trying a recording for the first time when it is dark outside as opposed to light, so I do apologise if the lighting is a little bit off for this video. It's a new experiment that I thought I'd trial just to see if it worked, and if it does, then maybe I'll continue to do it in the future, but if not, then this will be an isolated instance and you will never have to worry about it again. Now onto the topic of this video though, and I know full well that I've done videos looking at every single World Cup in a different format from this recently, be it of course the overachievers or the underachievers at every World Cup, but I thought I'd give a little bit of a gap between those videos and this one, and then I'd bring this one to you when the time is right to do so, and clearly that time is now. Once more, I went through every single World Cup tournament and picked out what I believe to be the most controversial moments in each competition, the one which caused the most uproar either nationally or internationally, and this is only concerned with events on the pitch and not off it, barring in one instance. I don't think any more clarification is needed because I think the concept is pretty self-explanatory, so without any further ado, here is my opinion on the most controversial moments from every single World Cup from 1930 until 2018. 1930, a game of 2 balls. No, that is not a euphemism. An incident that runs this one close came during Argentina versus France, when the referee somehow managed to blow his whistle 6 minutes before the game was due to finish, just as the French, who were chasing an equaliser, were on the counter-attack, before being persuaded to play out the final 6 minutes anyway, but by which point of course, the French momentum had evaporated, and they lost the game. My choice, though, came in the final between fierce rivals Argentina and Uruguay, with Uruguayan supporters already having sent death threats to Argentina's captain Luis Monti, who almost refused to play in the game as a result. Both sides demanded that a ball made in their own country should be used during the game, but the referee, Jean Languinos, then came to the conclusion that an Argentinian ball would be used for the first half and then a Uruguayan ball for the second. Argentina won the first half 2-1, but Uruguay, with their football now in play, scored 3 unanswered goals to take the first World Cup in their own country in very contentious circumstances. 1934, Benito Mussolini's influence. Italy were given the hosting rights for the 1934 World Cup despite the prevalence of fascism throughout the country, although this was the perfect opportunity for Mussolini to showcase what a powerhouse his nation had become. He used whatever means necessary, nefarious or otherwise, to ensure that Italy would emerge as champions of their own tournament, inviting the referees for both their quarter-final and semi-final games for so-called whining and dining. It is little wonder, therefore, that the Italians received some extremely fortunate decisions in their favour, especially in their semi-final clash against Austria's Voller team, whom they beat 1-0, with Mussolini's influence being all too clear, as the referee allowed many Italian fouls to go unpunished. Italy would win the final 2-1 in extra time against Czechoslovakia and were awarded the Jules Rimet trophy, as well as one that Il Duce had commissioned to be made, which was 6 times as big as the actual Jules Rimet trophy. 1938, the Battle of Bordeaux. You'll see incidents entitled The Battle of a certain place here crop up quite a few times in this video, and this is the first example of it. It involved a game in the semi-finals between Brazil and Czechoslovakia for a place in the semi-finals, and, to put it lightly, it was an absolute free-for-all, with Oldrich Nejedly suffering a broken leg, Franciszek Pranitska a broken arm, and Josef Katalek a stomach injury. Brazil will be reduced to 9 men, although the Czechs would also see 1 man sent off too, after Jan Reikhardt and Macedos came to blows and were both dismissed at the same time. The game would end up 1-1, but in the replay, Brazil would emerge as triumphant by a margin of 2-1, in a game which, in stark contrast to the first game, was extremely peaceful and placid. I wonder why that might be. 1950, a false start. Probably the least controversial World Cup as far as my own research could tell me. The most notorious event that I could find, barring of course the Maracanazo, which I don't think was controversial, it was just circumstantial, was Yugoslavia being forced to start their game against Brazil with 10 men through no fault of their own. Reikhardt Mitic, one of the Yugoslav attackers, had cut his head on an exposed girder and had to be treated for it, and the team went back into the dressing room to help him recover, but the referee, Mervyn Griffiths, forced them to return to the pitch, refusing to delay the kickoff time in spite of Mitic's injury. Bear in mind, of course, no subs were allowed in those days. Within 3 minutes, they were 1-0 down, and despite Mitic's return later in the game, Brazil already had a 1-goal head start which they wouldn't relinquish, scoring once more before the game was out. 1954, the Battle of Bern. I've covered the final more than enough, even with the doping allegations which were raised by the Hungarians in the aftermath of the final, which were, of course, controversial. So instead, let's turn our attention to another game featuring the magical Magyars, which concerns their quarter-final clash against Brazil, which they won 4-2. And I use the word clash in the most literal sense of the word. After a series of niggling fouls by the Hungarian defence, the Brazilian fuse was blown, and 20 minutes from time, Josef Bosic and Nilton Santos came to blows and both were dismissed, with the Brazilians being reduced to 9 men after Humberto Tozzi kicked out Aguirre Laurent. After the match, the fracas continued in the dressing room, with bottles and boots being thrown around, and the Hungarian coach, Gustav Szebes, saw his cheek cut open, and Pinheiro of Brazil would suffer a wound which was 8 centimeters long after the injured Ferenc Puskás attacked him. Rightfully, this game is now known as the Battle of Bern, just a week or so before the miracle of Bern would happen. 1958, semi-final chauvinism. Sweden, who were the hosts of the competition, were to play West Germany in the semi-finals, and they decided to use their home advantage to full effect. They originally didn't grant the West German supporters any seats at all to watch the game, but after the West German FA threatened to boycott the match, as a result of this lack of hospitality, the Swedes changed their mind and allocated some spots to their opponents and their supporters. Even so, on the day of the game itself, they still found an opportunity to poke fun at the Germans even more, confining the Germans as cheerleaders to the running track whilst allowing their own to take centre stage on the pitch. Clearly, this had an effect, as the Swedes won 3-1 to book their place in the final for the first and only time in their history and knock the reigning champions out. 1962, the Battle of Santiago. David Coleman of the BBC introduced the highlights package to this game with the following words, quote, "Good evening. The game you're about to see is the most stupid, appalling, disgusting and disgraceful exhibition of football possibly in the history of the game." Close quote. If that doesn't give you an indication of what happened during this game, then I don't know what will. Chile and Italy had traded insults back and forth between each other in the press, with the Italians stating that in Chile, quote, "taxis were as rare as faithful husbands," close quote, and that the population were frequently subject to malnutrition and illiteracy, and the Chileans described the Italians as fascists and drug addicts. Their fury was taken out on the pitch, with the first foul occurring after just 12 seconds, and karate kicks, fights and spitting were not uncommon sights, with the police also being called into action to drag Italy's Giorgio Ferrini off the pitch after he'd been sent off after just 8 minutes. Italy would end the game with 9 men, and Chile would capitalise on this to win a brutal game 2-0. 1966. Did it cross the line? The eternal debate amongst English and German football fans. Did Geoff Hurst's shot really cross the line at Wembley? Some sources, including Sky Sports, have shown that it did, and others, including at Imperial College London and at the University of Oxford, concluded that at most 97% of the ball actually went over the line, but at the time it was almost impossible to tell, with goal line technology not even a side thought at this stage. The final between England and West Germany had gone to extra time with the score at 2-2, but in the 101st minute, Hurst hit a shot which cannoned off the underside of the bar and bounced down either onto or past the goal line. The referee consulted his linesman who signalled that it had gone over the line, and the referee duly agreed, awarding Hurst his second goal in very disputed fashion, and the West Ham striker would go on to complete his hat-trick in the final minute of the game to earn England their first and only World Cup. 1970, wrong team's free kick. If that refereeing error was understandable, this one was anything but. El Salvador had only gone through a lot to reach this World Cup, especially given their conflict and indeed games against Honduras, and in their debut against the host Mexico, they put up a decent first half showing, but on the stroke of half time came the decision which turned the game around completely. Referee Hussein Candil gave El Salvador a free kick, which was then promptly taken by Mario Perez of Mexico, leading to Mexico running down the other end of the pitch and scoring through Javier Valdivia. Unbelievably, the goal was allowed to stand, and the El Salvador players simply refused to take the kickoff in protest against the decision, so the ref blew his whistle for half-time earlier than anticipated before one of the Salvadorian players kicked the ball into the crowd in disgust. They would lose the game 4-0. 1974. East Germany versus political opponents. The final spot of the 1974 World Cup was taken by Chile after the USSR forfeited their second leg in the playoff against them as a result of political tortures which were taking place at Chile's national stadium and throughout the country at the hands of the right-wing dictator Augusto Pinochet. The Soviet bloc was critical of FIFA's decision to allow the game to go ahead, which included East Germany, who were qualified for the finals, and they threatened a boycott. FIFA convinced them to stick around, but somehow the draw pitted them against not only their fierce rivals and neighbours of West Germany, but also, naturally, with Chile. No matter, East Germany would beat their neighbours and draw with their South American opponents to top their group before being knocked out in the next round. 1978. Argentina versus Peru. Argentina being allowed to remain as host despite committing multiple human rights violations, with many players signing up for an amnesty campaign in response to what was going on in the country, was bad enough in and of itself, but I'm trying to keep my focus on events on the pitch, so I turned my attention to another Argentinian game. Argentina needed to beat Peru by 4 or more goals to progress to the final at Brazil's expense, and allegations would emerge that Peru had sent political prisoners to Argentina to be tortured, and in return, they would lose by a significant margin. Argentina's president, Jorge Videla, arrived with controversial US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger pre-match in the Peru dressing room to encourage them, and Argentina would go on to win the game 6-0 before beating the Netherlands 3-1 in the final. Suspicious stuff indeed. 1982. The Disgrace of Gijón. Ever wondered why all final group stage matches at the World Cup are played at exactly the same time? Well, this is the reason why. Algeria, Austria and West Germany were all vying for the 2 qualification spots for the next round, and after Algeria had stunned the Germans 1-0 and beaten Chile in their final game, they looked certain to finish in pole position and qualify alongside Austria. However, the Germans and the Austrians would play each other later in the day, and worked out that a 1 or 2 goal margin of victory for the Germans would send them both through at Algeria's expense. And of course, as you may have guessed, that is exactly what was played out, as the West Germans took the lead after just 10 minutes, and then after that came absolutely no attempt whatsoever to score. They would proceed to play the next 80 minutes of the game as though it were a kickabout in the park, passing the ball between each other nonchalantly and with no intention whatsoever of scoring again. The Germans post-match were unremorseful, claiming that winning above all else was the most important thing to them, but they received widespread condemnation in the press, and following this, FIFA decreed that all final group stage matches would be played at the same time. 1986. The Hand of God. The 1986 World Cup might as well be called the Diego Maradona World Cup, because the tournament well and truly belonged to him, for reasons both good and bad. He would perhaps hit a peak that has never been matched in a 7-game period ever since, and on his way to inspiring Argentina to World Cup glory, the quarter-final game against England epitomised his character more than any other possibly could. His second goal came after a phenomenal solo run past several English defenders who were left bamboozled before rounding Peter Shilton to tap it into the net, but his first goal saw him somehow outjump the English goalkeeper, but only by virtue of using his fist to punch the ball into the net. Everyone saw it apart from the person who mattered most, that being the referee, who inexplicably gave the goal, and Argentina went on to win the game 2-1, with Maradona describing the incident as a little with the head of Maradona and a little with the hand of God. 1990. Reikhardt spits on Voller. The Holland vs Germany rivalry was starting to click into gear around this time, and this match has been cited as the catalyst for an increase in footballing tension between the two nations, not least helped by Frank Rijkaard's antics towards German striker Rudi Voller. The German striker was tackled by Reikhardt early on, who was booked and then subsequently caught by the cameras spitting on Voller, but in the 21st minute, a bust up in the Dutch box led to Voller and Reikhardt, who pulled at the former's hair, both being sent off. As they walked off the pitch, the Dutch legend was indisputably caught to have spat directly into Voller's mullet before jogging on as though nothing had happened. Germany would have the last laugh though, beating the Dutch 2-1 and then going on to win the tournament. 1994. Maradona sent home. This was meant to be Diego Maradona's comeback tournament on the global stage, having been banned for 15 months in 1991 after testing positive for cocaine and working his way back to full fitness in the 2 years since his ban had expired. However, after scoring against Greece, he celebrated by running bug-eyed to the camera and dementedly screaming at it, leading to some concerns being raised. Despite assisting 2 in their next game against Nigeria, he was led off the pitch by a nurse and sent for a drug test, where he was found to have tested positive for ephedrine doping. FIFA banned him from the tournament, and Maradona would never play for Argentina again. 1998. Beckham Kicks Out at Simeone. The second round clash between old foes England and Argentina had not disappointed in the first half, with 4 goals being shared by the two sides by the interval. Merely 2 minutes into the second half though, and the game's intensity was ramped up another notch, as Diego Simeone successfully wound up England's golden boy David Beckham, making him respond to a taunt with an impetuous, but pretty harmless, flick of his leg towards Simeone. The current Atletico Madrid manager tumbled to the floor in agony despite barely being hit, but it was done right under the nose of the referee, who seemingly had no choice but to send Beckham off. England would lose on penalties, and the press made Beckham a national pariah, with one newspaper headlining, quote, 10 heroic lions, 1 stupid boy, close quote. 2002, Rivaldo's perfect dive. I've covered the South Koreans making it to the semi-finals quite a lot recently, so instead, let's turn our attention to the Brazil team who would end up winning the whole tournament. In the 94th minute of their first game at the finals against prospective semi-final opponents Turkey, Brazil were winning 2-1 in the 94th minute after 2 of their 3 Rs, Ronaldo and Rivaldo, had scored, cancelling out Hasan Sass's 45th minute opener. In the last moments of the game, Brazil, in an attempt to waste time, won a corner and Hakan Ünsal kicked the ball directly at Rivaldo, but in spite of it hitting his leg, he went down clutching his face, writhing around in agony as though he'd been hit by a bus. The linesman, despite standing a couple of metres away from the Brazilian, didn't even notice, and the referee decided to send Ünsal off, leaving Turkey down to 9 men. Rivaldo would later be fined 11,760 Swiss francs for unsporting behaviour after the footage was reviewed, a process which must surely have taken no more than a few seconds. 2006, Zidanes Headbutt. The Battle of Nuremberg would have won in almost any other World Cup, but there is only one possible instance that could take it for the 2006 finals in Germany. In the grand finale for not only that World Cup but for Zinedine Zidane's playing career as a whole, he would fall victim to some wind-up tactics by Marco Materazzi, who insulted Zidane's sister or mother, depending on which sources you believe, before receiving Zidane's bald head square on in the chest. The referee and linesman didn't see the incident, but after communications with the fourth official and protests from Gianluigi Buffon, the referee had no choice but to send Zidane walking from the pitch, and he wouldn't even been able to complete his final game in professional football. Italy would win the match on penalties. 2010, Suarez becomes a goalkeeper. Frank Lampard's shot, which clearly crossed the line for England against Germany, almost clinched it, but England would go on to lose that game 4-1, meaning that the goal that was disallowed didn't really have an influence on the game in question, whereas the moments I picked most certainly did. Ghana were attempting to become the first African representatives in the World Cup semi-finals in its entire history, and they took Uruguay all the way to extra time when, in the last minute of that extra 30-minute period, Luis Suarez blocked a goal-bound Ghana shot on the line with his hands. Suarez was dismissed and a penalty was given, but Asamoah Gyan blasted it against the bar, and Suarez was caught by the cameras celebrating wildly, and when Uruguay ended up winning on penalties, he was paraded round the pitch by the Uruguayan players as a national hero. Who says cheaters never prosper, eh? 2014, Suarez becomes a cannibal. Luis Suarez makes his second consecutive appearance with an incident which he tried to shrug off, but, obviously, with very limited success. In the 79th minute of Uruguay's winner-takes-all clash with Italy in Group D, Suarez and Giorgio Chiellini clashed in the box before Suarez proceeded to sink his teeth into Chiellini's shoulder, committing his third biting offence in just 4 years. Chiellini immediately showed the bite marks in his shoulder to the referee, but nothing came of it on the pitch, and Suarez would say in a post-match interview that he just so happened to collide with Chiellini. FIFA weren't buying his excuses though, and Suarez was banned for 9 international matches and given a 4-month complete suspension from all footballing activities, a ban which the president of Uruguay himself described as quote-unquote fascist. Whilst Chiellini did express his forgiveness, Suarez's ban remained intact and he didn't return to footballing action until October 2014, by which point of course he had signed for Barcelona from Liverpool. 2018, Shaqiri and Xhakas Eagle celebrations. Japan playing out the last 10 minutes of their game against Poland doing absolutely nothing save for the knowledge that they would progress over Senegal by virtue of the fair play rule is an honourable mention, or a dishonourable mention if you rather. But I've gone for Xherdan Shaqiri and Granit Xhaka's double-headed eagle gestures during Switzerland's game against Serbia. Shaqiri and Xhaka are both of Kosovan and Albanian heritage, with both countries having animosities with Serbia, with the former only being partially recognised by the former Yugoslav nation as an independent country in its own right. As they score for their adopted homeland of Switzerland in their 2-1 comeback win over the Serbs, they gave the eagle gesture, meant to represent Albanian nationalism, and the Serbian public were outraged and called for them to be banned from playing completely, but in the end they were only fined 10,000 francs. just for expressing their identity. That just about wraps up today's video. Thank you very, very much for watching. I really do hope that you have enjoyed it. If you have any other things like whatever tournaments or moments or things like that that you want me to look at, let me know which ones down in the comments below. And while you are here, hit the like button if you really enjoyed the video and subscribe while you are at it. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, I'll see you then.